So my name's Karl Lamb. I live outside of Cambridge, and I've been an engineer and a physicist for about 30 odd years. I've also been teaching co-counselling for about that long as well in my non-working life. And I've become a writer on social change, trying to combine ideas from co-counselling with understanding of how humans and systems work. So I'm going to be talking about addressing the question is lifestyle change, climate action, but in a way talking about the situation we're in and the kind of why we got here, really. So are you timing from now, or shall I start a timer?
Yeah, I'm timing.
Okay, I'll start this just so I have some idea of how long I've got. So the twin threats of climate breakdown and biodiversity collapse mean we're currently heading towards massive food shortages, the breakdown of organised human society, and the possibility of human extinction in the medium term. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, "We have only a few years in which to act before we reach the point of no return." And this will require urgent, unprecedented and collective climate action in all areas. There is no time to waste. And so I want to give you a kind of feel for the nature of the beast we're dealing with. So I'm going to talk about one aspect of climate breakdown, which is positive feedback loops. And people used to talk about these things as vicious circles. And there are many feedback loops in the climate system, and one of them is methane release. So methane is a greenhouse gas. It's about 80 to 100 times more powerful in its greenhouse effect than carbon dioxide, which is better known. Although it's over a shorter time frame, it only lasts about 9 years in the atmosphere. And the Earth has been heating slowly because of human activity since the Industrial Revolution. And this is now causing permafrost in the Arctic to melt. And billions of tons of once frozen vegetation start to rot because they become unfrozen, and that releases methane. There's also a vast but unquantified amount of methane stored as crystalline methane hydrates under the seabed in the Arctic. And as the subsea permafrost melts, this starts to bubble out as methane gas. And all this methane will contribute to the Earth heating further. And of course, as it heats further, yet more methane is released in a positive feedback loop. And at some point, this effect may release more greenhouse gases than we are. And at this point, the system has gone beyond our control. Even if we reduce our emissions to zero, it won't stop the Earth heating. And we have no idea where the temperature rise will stop, or whether human life will be possible at that point. And both of these processes have already begun, and there are many other feedback loops beside methane. So the IPCC, which is the UN body that informs government policy on climate change, didn't include these kinds of feedback loops in its reports because they were hard to quantify and because of political pressure. This is a totally inappropriate way to respond to high severity risks. So if you have a high severity risk, even if there's only a small chance of it happening, the intelligent thing to do is to not go anywhere near that risk. 1% doesn't sound like a very high risk, but if you were going to get on an aeroplane that had a 1% chance of crashing, I think you would think twice about it. And so, really, we have to ask, how did we get to this point? And these problems have been understood for at least 40 years, but we've done almost nothing in response. So, I'm going to list some of the reasons. So, one, if our lives are or feel precarious, we tend to make short-term survival decisions, and this is very understandable. It's understandable, but it's often exactly the opposite of what's needed. For instance, recently people in Australia voted against the opposition who were putting forward ecological policies because the ruling party scared them about losing their jobs. Another reason, many people would like to do the right thing by the environment, but our lives are constrained by what we can buy. But we can only buy what's offered for sale, and it's only those things that make a profit for someone that can be possibly offered. If it doesn't make a profit, no one can offer it for sale. but often the things that end up being offered for sale are not what's actually needed. So you have a load of choice, but none of the choices are what we actually need. Something else that's happening. There's a kind of revolving door between the energy industry and, in the UK, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Energy industry lobbyists were seconded to the government department, and while they were there, they wrote our energy policies. And then nearly 90% of people leaving the energy department took up jobs in the energy sector, including 6 former energy ministers. So basically, the profit-making side of things is writing our government policy. Another reason, huge levels of distraction, silence and misinformation in the media. And if we saw this happening in another country, it would look like propaganda or a disinformation campaign. And until recently, a large majority of people thought the BBC, at least, was an unbiased news source. And it seems to me almost everyone feels too isolated and powerless to make big changes. We feel like no one else cares, that no one else would stand with us to make the big changes we need, so we resort to the best we can figure out as isolated individuals. And when confronted with the problems, our minds tend to veer away from the scale of the changes that are needed onto what we can contemplate, like more recycling or buying an electric car. And these reasons that I just outlined above are not isolated happenings. They're the result of a system that has arisen around us. And this system, I don't believe it was anyone's idea. I think it kind of spontaneously formed thousands of years ago. This system functions by inducing passivity, disconnection, mistrust, competition, misinformation, cold-heartedness, and a vulnerability to mistreat others in every individual. No one escapes this, unfortunately. And I'll quote from one of my articles. It's a network of inhuman relationships that has persisted and reproduced itself, but which serves no human purpose. As human beings, even the so-called elites are victims of this inhuman social system. It's so pervasive, it's led to a deep and widespread misunderstanding of human nature. So what do we need to do at this point, late in the day? Basically, I think we have to throw everything we've got at this problem starting now. And the main problems aren't technical. There are plenty of good ideas. There's a project called Zero Carbon Britain by the Centre for Alternative Technology, for instance, that's very well researched. And there's another project I suddenly can't remember the name of now. The Drawdown Project, I think, something like that, with plenty of good ideas. The main problem is mobilizing everybody behind real solutions. And can we do that? Can we act that fully and that powerfully? Well, something like that level of unified activity in the face of a huge change happened in this country and in the United States during World War II. Can we mobilize people to meet this even bigger challenge? I want to end with some questions. How will we mobilize people intelligently in the time we have left? Personally, I think that whatever we do won't work unless we also challenge the effects of the system that brought us to this point. So I think we have to address passivity, disconnection, mistrust, competition, misinformation, cold-heartedness, and a vulnerability to mistreat others that have been induced in every one of us. And that's the reason I joined Extinction Rebellion. And the reason I joined is because Extinction Rebellion, as I see it, has at its heart not only agitating for big change, but doing it through rehumanizing ourselves. So I'll end here, and we're going to be moving on this evening into general conversations. And so my question is to you is, how will we mobilize people intelligently in the time we have left? Thank you.
Thank you.